Butler, and I'm the Exhibit and Education Chairperson at the Fiber Arts Center. Our second interview features the artwork of Monika Karousman from Berlin, Maryland. Monika has been making art with fibers since she was a small child. Here is Monika's story.
A needle felter, knitter, wool spinner, wool dyer, and what are the other? And a weaver, yeah. So we're down here in Berlin, Maryland on the St. Martin's River, and we're just going to ask Monika a few questions. And also, we're hoping to get her to come and join us at the Fiber Arts Center in Denton in the future to teach some wonderful classes for us. So, Monika, what led you to the world of fiber arts, and when did you get started?
Oh my goodness. I got started as a child. This was a homeschool project. My mom had always had an interest in homesteading, crafting, and so we took a spinning class from a friend of ours, and I got a spinning wheel for Christmas, and then I got a loom, and you just kind of keep going from there. So I think I was about 10. I think I was 10 years old when I got started in this.
What forms of fiber art do you enjoy now?
Right now, with my busy schedule of midwifery and my own kids, most of the time I find myself doing spinning.
Mm-hmm.
Spinning and knitting. I just don't have a lot of time with a lot of extra equipment. I haven't done a lot of needle felting because I'm not ready to give my kids let my kids find those. But I really look forward to getting them into some wet felting as the weather gets warmer.
And what's the difference between needle felting and wet felting?
So needle felting was actually something that was developed in like the 60s or 70s. It was actually an industrial form that was used to create mattresses, and it eventually became an art form. And so we use needles that have what are like nicks or little burrs on the side,
Mm-hmm.
so they push and mat the fibers together. But with that, you have a little bit more control over shaping, and so this lends itself very well to 3D sculptures or small animal toys or jewelry and those kinds of things. With wet felting, you're relying merely on your own elbow grease and the soap suds to provide friction to put those together. You can still do 3D forms, hats, socks, sweaters, those kinds of things, but a lot of wet felting that I personally do is in picture form, so it's more of like painting with wool, I like to call it. So.
And when you're doing either of those types of felting, do you use the loft of the wool, or is it, what kind of wool? Or
any wool, you can use any wool for that.
Is it spun?
No, it would be the raw, not raw, but carded wool.
Carded wool, yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Are these examples of wet felting?
Yes, these are all wet felted. That one has some needle felted aspects to it. But all of the rest of these are wet felted. Yes.
They're beautiful.
Thank you.
I've heard that needle felting in particular is a little rough on the hands, and that you can really injure yourself if you're not careful.
You can definitely poke yourself, but at least when I teach classes, I really focus on the safety of keeping hands away and how to properly use the tools so that they cause the least amount of damage.
What is spinning? How does it work? I mean, we've all seen the spinning wheel. That is different from a loom, right? A loom is used in weaving.
Yes.
And the spinning wheel, you would get the carded wool, is that correct? And then what happens?
So after you have the carded wool, the way that a spinning wheel works is that it provides tension and like revolutions or twists. So what pre-spinning wheels used to do is they would actually roll the wool on their leg, and in that way cause the friction and the rolling. Eventually they tied a rock to it and would spin the rock while dropping and pulling on that. And then that led to the creation of the drop spindle, which is, you've seen those, some of them are very ornate. I do collect them myself. And then to the spinning wheel. So it's a much faster production of yarn, and it merely spins the wool to make it stronger so that it stays together. You're the one that controls the thickness and thinness of how of what you're working on, and then out of convenience, the spinning wheel also winds it around a bobbin as it works. So with a drop spindle, once you run out of arm's length, you have to stop and wind it on. And with a spinning wheel, as you're working, it's winding it onto the bobbin.
That's cool. And then from there, are you able to actually knit with it? Or
You can knit with it. That tends to have a bias to it unless you have done a few other techniques to it, but all yarn is spun in a clockwise revolution. So you always want your spinning wheel going clockwise, but if everything is spinning clockwise, then you usually have a bias to the right when you knit something. Not always, but that's the general thing. Or even if you spin, sometimes it's just because it's all twisted in the same direction. So what we do to remedy that situation is to ply it with something. So like when you buy a yarn that's a 3-ply or 4-ply, that just means how many strands have been spun together. So after you've spun at least 2 bobbins, you would then take them and spin them together in a counterclockwise, which then helps to balance your yarn. And there are tests that you can do at home even just to see how balanced your yarn is, or if you are over tensioned in one way or the other.
is that something that is like super relaxing or fun, or what do you love about it?
I think that it depends on the type of spinner that you are. There's like old wives' tale, or just a general consensus among fiber artists that there are usually like kind of 2 types of spinners. One is the process spinner, and one is the product spinner. So a product spinner has an idea of what they want to make. I want to make a hat, and I want it to be this color and this kind of yarn, and then they spin to make that hat. And then there are people like me who just enjoy the process of spinning, and I will spin anything and then decide what to do with it. Right. So for me, the process is very relaxing because I don't really care how my yarn turns out. I decide to do it thicker, I decide to do it thinner, I decide to do an art, fun, funky yarn. I then figure out what to do with it afterwards.
Cool.
But a lot of people really find spinning to be very relaxing after you get the basics down of it, because it's very meditative. As I have, and most spinners will have a default setting for their spinning. So if you're watching something or you're otherwise engaged, talking, whatever, you don't have to pay attention to what you're doing because your hands and the spinning wheel, you have it set to like a default setting. Right. And that's what you usually spin, and that's the weight that you spin. So it's very relaxing.
Yeah, that sounds cool. And what about weaving? When you get ready to weave, do you also weave with carded wool?
Weaving, you would use your spun yarn. So usually either things that you bought or you spun. Weaving, you would have to use spun.
And is that involving a loom and?
Yeah, there's so there are like floor looms, table looms. Those are all different harnesses, meaning how many different like shafts they have. Right. And they're called harnesses, but the rigid heddle uses one, and it just makes a very in the beginning it's just a very basic weave, and then you can go off of it, but it's a really great basis for learning how to weave and what weaving entails before really dipping into these larger, more complicated looms. I honestly prefer rigid heddle weaving just because I enjoy my art and my craft because I enjoy doing it. And so for me it needs to be relaxing and fun.
How is your fiber art influenced by women's seasons? I read that in your bio.
Yes, one of the reasons that I was so interested in fiber art to begin with was because it was considered women's work in the beginning. Sure, there were definitely men tailors and men weavers and spinners, but they tended to be focused on the actual production and selling of these products, where women were focused on it at home for doing it for their own family. And so doing this like women's work, what we would consider to be work, has now become an art form